Let's talk about National Football League. In 1920, the hotbed of football was the Midwest. Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, to a degree New York. 1920 in Canton, Ohio, which has just a great legacy of the game. That's where the Hall of Fame is. A group of owners got together and said, let's form a professional league. Because before that, it had been guys playing on teams as a second job, and they'd barnstorm around the country, and there was no organization. National Football League formed in 1920. And they started in small markets, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Pottstown Maroons outside of Philadelphia, Green Bay. They were called the Packers, but they had a different name. Detroit had a franchise, not the Lions. It was called the Staleys after an automobile maker. So they had a franchise up in Duluth, Minnesota, called the Duluth Eskimos.
Oh my God, that's way the heck up there.
And what happened was the great college players, after they left school, would sign a contract to play. Red Grange would play in Chicago. Bronco Nagurski played in Duluth. I interviewed those guys when they were alive back in the 70s. And so football had some structure, but it was still kind of a mom and pop run organization. And then along came the 1950s, and here came this guy who became the new commissioner. His name was Pete Rozelle. Pete had come from an advertising background, a public relations background, come from New York. Pete had vision. This is what we're going to do to make the NFL bigger. He crossed paths with an advertising executive out of New York who wound up buying a franchise. His name was Art Modell. Art Modell's the one that created the NFL TV contract. And then the league, all of a sudden, was on national television every Sunday. Now, you didn't get to see all the teams. You only got to see the teams that were playing that day on that telecast. Pittsburgh Steelers, Bobby Lane days versus the New York Football Giants. They grew the program. And then they decided, well, we'll have two networks. We'll put some games on CBS. We'll put some games on ABC. And there were a couple of other networks there. NBC was there. DuMont Network was there. Now, this goes back in time. So as the league started to grow, 50s into the 60s, boom. Still wasn't a corporate venture like it is today. They moved to the 70s, and because of Modell's connections in the TV business, Art Modell came up with the concept of Monday Night Football.
Nice.
Howard Cosell, Dandy Don, Frank Gifford. Monday Night Football became an institution. And then because people started to gravitate towards the networks, all of a sudden they decided, well, we're going to play games on other nights. And then they started to expand. Then the merger came. The AFL had gone into business in the 60s. And the NFL, looked at them and said, nah, no big deal. Well, when they started taking NFL quarterbacks to go to the American Football League, the George Blandas of the world and the Frank Trapucas and those guys, suddenly the league understood that they were getting rated and they were getting hurt. And then the AFL started to sign first-round draft picks. Great running back, Billy Cannon out of LSU, went to the Houston Oilers. NFL had drafted him. He never even met with them. He took the Houston money and went and played. All of a sudden, the AFL, NFL, then they merged. And then it became big business. And then, obviously, the growth with ESPN. I remember interviewing Pete Rozelle when I first got to San Diego as voice of the Chargers. I said, do you ever think you put your games on cable network? Oh, no. We have our network partners.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing you know, ESPN is up and running, and they get NFL games.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest is history. Now it's become a mega business. It's become a global business. We talked about planting your flag and playing games in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be a European division? Is there going to be a franchise based out of London? So the league has just exploded globally. But it all started in 1920 with mom and pop operations in the Duluth Eskimos.
Yeah, well, that goes way back. And I just remember following the NFL as a kid in the 70s. And back then it was the NFL Today with Brent Musburger and Irv Cross and Jimmy the Greek. And what was the other lady's name? It was Phyllis.
I know Phyllis George.
Phyllis George, thank you. And boy, that was an institution. That pregame show. It's like you're looking live at Minneapolis, with Brent Musburger. It was great. And you always knew that that CBS had the NFC and NBC had the AFC. And then suddenly the NFC went to Fox. And I remember that blew my mind, that they switched networks like that because it had been such an institution.
Money talks, people walks.
Yeah.
I said the same thing. Fox?
Yeah.
Fox is going to do football?
Right.
And they hit the floor running with creative stuff that had never been done on the other networks. All of a sudden, they're a player, and they've been a player ever since.
Well, back then, Fox was still in its infancy. I think they had The Simpsons, and maybe Married with Children, and that was it. So it's incredible then how we got into the 80s and the Super Bowl just became such a big event. I mean, now it's like an American holiday, the Super Bowl is. And I think it was when we got into the 80s, it was like football started to creep up and pass baseball. And then definitely in the 90s, it was for sure.
Blew by it.
Right.
Yeah, just absolutely amazing. Baseball's made a comeback, but not to the level of success that football has become. Okay.